Hello everyone, welcome back. In our last lesson, we looked at the four rules of sort. We looked at the multiplication rule, the division rule, the addition rule, and we also looked at the subtraction rule. In today's lesson, we're going to look at conjugate sort. What are conjugate sort? Now, before we look at conjugate sort, I would like to remind us that when you have root 3 multiplied by another root 3, your answer is going to be 3. Take note of this rule. So in general, when you have root x multiplied by root x, your answer is going to be x. Okay, now let's dive in. What are conjugate sort? Conjugate sort are two sorts whose product results in a rational number. Before now, we've looked at what rational numbers are. We say numbers like 2, 3, that they are rational numbers, that any number that can be expressed as a ratio of two integers, like 2 over 4, okay, let me say 3 over 5, they are rational numbers. Remember that 2 is the same thing as 2 over 1. 3 is the same thing as 3 over 1. Okay, so all these are rational numbers because they can be expressed as a ratio of two integers. Now, conjugate sort are two sorts that when multiplied together will result into a rational number. If you have an expression that contains difference of two squares, it will result into a rational number. Take for instance, you have this expression root x plus root y. Okay, let's multiply it with root x minus root y. Now this is difference of two squares. Now let's multiply it. When we multiply them out, let's check our result. Now this multiplies this. Root x times root x is gonna give us root x times root x. Okay, root x multiplies minus root y, which we're gonna have minus root x, okay, times root y. Yeah, and root y multiply root x, we're gonna have plus root y times root x. Now this root y multiplies minus root y, we then have root y times root y. Okay, now remember this rule here. Root x times root x gives us x. Root 3 times root 3 gives us 3. Hence, root x multiplied by root x will give us x. Okay, now here we have minus root x times root y, the same thing as xy, that is x times y is giving us root xy. Okay, we have our plus. Now y times x, that is giving us xy still, root xy. Okay, so we'll have this y times root y times root y. Applying this same rule, root y times root y will give us y. Okay, so now let's rearrange this. We then have our answer to be x. Okay, minus y, right, minus root xy plus root xy. Of course, minus root xy plus root xy, we cancel out. So it's the same thing as you saying minus 2 plus 2, which is going to result to 0. So minus root xy plus root xy will be 0. So we are left here with x minus y. And of course, this is going to result to a rational number where x and y stands for a real number. So this is going to result to a rational number. Now take for instance, let's use a typical number. Let's say you have root 3 minus, let's say, root 2. Okay, multiplied, let's multiply it by root 3 plus root 2. Now, if this gives us a rational number, it therefore means that these two surds are conjugate to each other. Okay, so this is going to be a conjugate of this, and this is going to be a conjugate of this if their product results to a rational number. All right, now let's check it out. Let's multiply out root 3 times root 3, root 3 times root 3, okay, root 3 times root 2. Let's do that. So we're going to have plus root 3 times root 2. Okay, now let's use the second term here to multiply what we have in this very bracket. Minus root 2 times root 3. That is minus root 2 times root 3. Okay, so minus root 2 now times the second term, which is root 2. So we have here minus root 2 times root 2. Okay, now let's simplify and see what we have. Root 3 times root 2, root 3 will give us 3. Don't forget the rule here. The rule here says that root x times root x is going to give us x. Hence, root 3 times root 3 will give us 3. Okay, so here we have 3, and here we have root 3 times root 2 is the same thing as 3 times 2. Okay, 3 times 2. Okay, now we have minus root 2 times root 3, which is going to give us minus 2 times 3. Okay, now root 2 times root 2, what is it going to give us? Following this same rule, root x multiplied by root x equals x. That's the rule we are going with. So root 2 multiplied by root 2 will give us 2. Okay, now let's simplify further and let's also rearrange. So this is 3 minus 2. Okay, we can have that this is 3 plus, okay, let's multiply what we have here. 3 times 2 is giving us 6. So this is root 6 minus 2 times 3 is also giving us 6. This is root 6, then we'll have minus 2. Okay, so take note that 6 minus 6 is going to cancel out. It's going to give us 0. Yeah, root 6 minus root 6 is 0. So we are left with 3 minus 2. Of course, 3 minus 2 is 1. And 1 is a rational number. So, as can be seen here, that root 3 minus root 2 multiplied by root 3 plus root 2 give us a rational number. Therefore, we can say that root 3 plus root 2 is the conjugate of root 3 minus root 2. Okay, so in general, from what we have solved, we can establish that in general, we can establish this a rule. In general, when I have, let me say, root x plus root y, okay, multiplied by root x minus root y, the result is gonna be a rational number. It's gonna result to a rational number. And since it's gonna result to a rational number, it therefore means that this is a conjugate of this. Hence, root x minus root y is a conjugate of root x plus root y. Likewise, root x plus root y is a conjugate of root x minus root y. Now, the only difference here is just the signs. Here you have a plus, a positive sign. Here you have a negative sign, plus, and this is minus. That's the only difference between the conjugate. Okay, now, what then is the conjugate of, let's say, root 3 minus root 2? What's the conjugate of this? The conjugate of this will be root 3 plus root 2. This is correct. Okay, so what is the conjugate of, let me say, root 7 plus root 2? What's the conjugate? Of course, following this rule, the only difference here is the minus, plus or minus. So the conjugate of root 7 plus root 2 is going to be root 7 minus root 2. This is correct. How about this? Let me say minus 2 root 7 plus root 3. So, what's the conjugate surd of minus 2 root 7 plus root 3? The only difference is going to be minus. You change this plus to minus. So we're going to have the conjugate of this to be minus 2 root 7 minus. Now, instead of plus, we're going to change the plus to minus. So here we're going to have minus, okay? So minus root 3. So this is how to get conjugates of surd. In this lesson, we've looked at conjugate surd, and we noted that the only difference between them is the signs. Now, when we multiplied out, it resulted to, it gave us a value of 1. And this one, of course, is a rational number. Okay, so we established that root x plus root y multiplied by root x minus root y is going to result into a rational number. Hence, this will be the conjugate of this. And the only difference between them is the minus signs. Here you have plus and here you have minus. Okay, we asked ourselves, what is the conjugate of this? Root 3 minus root 2. All you need to do, change this negative sign to positive sign. Okay, change the minus to plus. This is the conjugate of this, and this is the conjugate of this. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Check out our next videos on simplification of sword. Bye for now.